Hi, this is Katie. In today's video, there's a bird. Of course he stopped now. Thank you. Nope. Can you hear that? It sounds like a sound effect of someone jumping on a trampoline. It's like boom, boom, boom. Hi, this is Katie. In today's video, I want to talk to you guys about some of the things that I regret purchasing for my first road trip. Okay, I'm being a little dramatic. I don't actually regret buying these things, but there are a couple things that I purchased within the first couple years of traveling and being on the road and living in my car. There's a couple things that I purchased that I just ended up not really using at all. And they're pretty popular things that a lot of other people use in one way or another. Maybe not exactly what I'm talking about, but similar things in one way or another. And just for me personally, with how I travel, we all travel differently, right? But with how I travel and how I've lived in my car on and off, but for the past 10 years, these are just some things that I purchased thinking that I might use them and then ended up not using them and or finding better alternatives that fit my lifestyle and my car better. So that's gonna be this video. If you're interested in this topic, I really hope that you're subscribed and I hope that you keep watching. Okay, so I have the list on my phone, but honestly, there's 3.5 things on this list, so I think I can remember them. So number one is a hard plastic cooler. So years and years and years and years ago, again, I'm not currently traveling and living in my car, but I did on and off for about 10 years. And so I have a lot of experience, but years ago, I bought one of those, or maybe did my mom give it to me? I can't remember if I bought one or if like my mom just had an extra one that she gave me. Can't remember, but one of those hard plastic coolers. You guys know what I'm talking about. They're like blue usually with like a white top, you know, and it was like this big. I had a pretty small one. However, I think I used it twice, like ever. And the thing about it is that it took up, for me in my tiny, tiny, tiny little car, that cooler took up way more room than I was willing to give up for something that I only used twice and was not a necessity. You know what I mean? And that I didn't like love and that I wasn't going to use in the future, you know? So basically this cooler, like, it was one of those hard plastic ones. So they take up a lot more space than just like the mushy, soft plastic ones. That I would consider maybe having in the car because if you're not using it, you can fold it up or whatever. But these hard plastic coolers, I literally remember one time that I was like, all right, I'm gonna try to use this cooler. I'm gonna try to use this cooler. First of all, I spent what, like $2 on ice. So I'm like, okay. And then I think like I wanted to make a sandwich or something. And so the one thing that I wanted to keep in the cooler from like the morning that I made a sandwich to, oh, maybe I'll use this later tonight, was an onion. So I literally chopped up an onion, put the rest of it in a cooler, just thinking because I might use it for dinner that night or something. So basically what ended up happening was that the cooler just started to smell like onions and I spent $2 on ice and this much space to save $1 onion. And just for me, I was like, Katie, this is not worth it. Like, again, for me, with how I travel and how I eat, it was just not worth it. I know a lot of people use coolers, refrigerators, anything like that when they're traveling in a car, in a van. But for me, like I had that cooler for a little while, maybe a few months, and just used it like once or twice. And then it smelled like onions. So it was kind of gross anyway. I love onions, but I don't want my car to smell like them. You know what I mean? But yeah, so just for me, a hard plastic cooler was just not necessary. Basically how I eat, I generally eat like single serving size meals. And so it's pretty rare that I need to save food anyway. And then even if I do, like say I get Chipotle at 11 a.m. and I only eat half of it and I want to eat the rest of the bowl in a few hours. I basically, if I'm ever going to do something like that, instead of me getting a cooler and using the space and stuff in my car for a cooler, I really am just like, well, this bowl has whatever in it, chicken or pork or no meat or whatever. And I'm like, I Google, use the Google, and I'm like, how long can cooked chicken sit out in the internet? You know, it's like 2 hours or whatever. So basically I make sure that I eat the rest of that Chipotle bowl within 2 hours. And then for me, that's basically fine. And then anything else that I'm eating, if I'm having a sandwich or something like that, I really just go to a deli at a grocery store and get like single serving size. So I'm not wasting any of the meat or anything like that. Yeah, so just for me, I never really needed a hard plastic cooler. All right, number two, while we're talking about food, I also purchased, rarely used and ended up getting rid of, a camping stove. So I know that they have like those like cylinder kind of camping stove things now, but like, you know, 8-9 years ago when I purchased the stove, it was actually maybe 10 years ago when I purchased this, it was a big-ish stove, like this big. and had like a proper burner on it and had like butane and stuff, which like I don't think is very safe to keep in the car all the time. But basically I bought that thinking when I'm on the road, when I'm camping, that maybe I'll cook some meals. Maybe I'll get some hot dogs or mac and cheese or whatever. And honestly, I probably kept that stove for a couple years. I definitely kept that for a while, way longer than I kept the cooler, but I kept that for several years. I ended up only using it when I camped and only sometimes when I went camping. So basically I probably only used that cooler, I don't even know, maybe a combined 12 times in like 4 years or something like that. I just rarely used it. And when I did, I think it was gluten-free mac and cheese. I think it's like the only thing I really ended up making on it. But yeah, just for me, like I, again, kind of going with the cooler talk, I just kind of figured out how to eat single serving size meals, but also ones that I don't have to cook. I cook a lot when I'm staying in a house or an apartment. I cook basically every day, but when I'm on the road, that just wasn't something that was interesting to me, I guess. That wasn't like my main priority. I'd rather find food in ways that I don't have to cook it, which again, personal preference, right? If you guys have a stove, some people I know when they travel, they use their stove like every day, and that's really cool. But just for me, like that was just not something that I wanted to do. I don't know. It wasn't even like really fun for me to like cook when I was in the car. That might change, right? Next year I might want to go on a road trip and I might want to get a little stove and cook or whatever. But just how I've done it in the past, it just wasn't as fun for me. So that's why I really only used it like when I was at a campground, like a proper campground, and really only made mac and cheese. So it just was like not a necessity to me. I know that a ton of people use them, but just for me, not a necessity. Didn't need it. So I got rid of it. All right. And the last main thing, I know I said I had 3.5 things on this list, but the third thing on this list is a giant sleeping mat. And so like I just mentioned, I like to go camping sometimes. And for me, again, all my personal preference, but for me, I think that even though I only camp, I mean, it depends on the year, but between like 5 and 20 times a year, I still think it's worth it for me to have a tent in the car, to have my sleeping bag in the car, and a couple other things that I would use for camping. However, the one thing that I had that I was like, no, Katie, you can buy an alternative version of this that will save space, was a sleeping mat. So a lot of sleeping mats are really, really thin, like really, really thin and like rolled up, and they're probably like this big. And then you take it out, you blow it up, and it turns into a sleeping mat. But the one that I purchased years ago was basically like, I don't even know how to explain it. It was like squishy, even when it wasn't blown up. It was already like thick and squishy. And then you could blow it up to make it even like thicker and squishier. But even when it was no air in it, whatever, and you just rolled it up, it still basically took up the same amount of space as a sleeping bag. So it was really, really big. Was it comfortable? Yes. Very comfortable. However, again, for the amount of space it took up, I did not find it to be a necessity. And I was able to find something that took up way less space that basically did exactly the same job. And so I did end up buying one of those really, really small sleeping mats that like when it's not blown up and when it's rolled up, it's like this big. It's like the size of like a really big burrito. But the other one that I had for a couple of years and I kept in the car that I really only used when I was camping. I think sometimes I would use it when I slept in the back seat. I can't remember. That was years ago. But most of the time I used it, I was camping. And literally when it was rolled up, it just took up as much room as a sleeping bag. And I was like, well, I know my sleeping bag is a necessity. I'm not really going to try to find a smaller one of those. I know my tent's a necessity. The one I have, honestly, I probably couldn't find one that takes up less space in the car, and the couple other things that I have. But particularly the sleeping mat, I was like, I can get another alternative that's not very expensive and that saves me a lot more space since I don't use it every day and it's not like a necessity. You know what I mean? So I did end up getting rid of that, even though it was pretty comfy. It's like partially like how I see this kind of stuff, because you guys know I talk about this kind of stuff all the time, like decluttering, and like I always go through my car. I go through my car even honestly like once a week. I'm kind of looking at a little section like, oh, do I need this? Do I need this? Do I need this? But every few months I go a little deeper in that. And I'm like, do I really need what I have? Or do I just have it because I've had it for a while? But am I really using it? Do I really love it? Do I even remember that I have it? You know? And so I think that kind of stuff's important when you're in a car or when you're in a house or an apartment anyway. Sometimes if there's too much stuff around that we're not using, it's just kind of unnecessary, unless we love it, right? Or it's a decoration or a collection, that's different. But I'm talking about if I have a sleeping mat that takes up this much space and I use it 10 times a year, that's just something I'm going to question. Okay, is it time now to maybe think of an alternative? Obviously, because I don't know how often you guys camp, or maybe it's just where I camp, but sleeping bag on tent on ground sometimes is not very comfy cozy. And so I definitely did want a little sleeping mat, but I just figured kind of downsizing the size of one from a giant one to a small one was a way better idea for me. If I camped all the time, would that have been a different story? Maybe. If I had a way bigger car and had the room for it, would that have been a different story? Maybe. But just for how I travel now and the space that I have, I did not need something that big. So I ended up getting rid of that too. So the last thing, I know I said 3.5 things. The last thing is more of an idea. It's more of a general idea of, and I know I just already kind of mentioned this, but basically I do not want to keep anything in my car that is taking up space, that I don't use, that I don't love, and especially when it's taking up a lot of space. But honestly, in my car, I literally think of things that are like this big. Like, do I have room for it? Is it worthwhile? Am I just gonna forget I have it anyway, you know? And so that's kind of like the half, is like, is more of the idea of, do I have any extra things? Do I love the things that I have? Do I use things that I have? Even the things that I don't use, am I like excited to have them? I know there are also gonna be some things that we have in the car or in a house or whatever, that we don't necessarily love or use, but that would be necessary or helpful in an emergency. So that's a little bit different as well. Like a first aid kit, right? I don't love it. I probably don't use it all the time anyway, but when I need it, I need it. And that's a really good thing for me to have, right? So certain things like that, or any car emergency kind of kit or whatever, you know, you might rarely need it and it might take up a decent amount of space, but important to have, or could be really, really useful if you need it. So it's just more the idea, like, I don't want things in my car that take up too much space, especially when there's an alternative, or that I just don't need it. So I think that's actually kind of it for this video. I hope that you guys enjoyed this quick little video, just talking about some of the things that I purchased and ended up regretting. I didn't really regret them, but just things that I purchased, because I know that those things, when people are traveling, when they're living on the road, are pretty common for people to have. And so they were things that I wanted to try out and they just didn't work for me. And so I actually think I'm gonna do another video soon of things that I never purchased for my car that are still really popular for other people, but that for me, I wouldn't even purchase in the first place. And so if you want to see that video, let me know in the comments. And also let me know in the comments anything that you purchased for a road trip and you were like, actually, I don't know why I purchased this. I never use it. I don't need it. Let me know in the comments if you ever did that, because I'm really, really curious. But yeah, I guess that's going to be it. Thanks again. And I hope you have a wonderful day. I love you. Jesus loves you. And I'll talk to you later. Bye.